Welcome to our Advent Worship and Chat, a weekly opportunity for you to take a break from the busyness of the season. The order of service for this worship you will find on our website, holycrosslutheran.ca. We're happy you joined us for our sojourn into the darkness. As always, we worship as we live, in the midst of the one in which darkness is held, our lover, beloved, and love itself. Omicron. Atmospheric rivers. Drowning refugees. Divided nations. Ruptured families. Darkness, darkness, and more darkness. O divinity, beyond our grasp, do you see what we see? Can you feel what we feel? Can you hear what we hear? Are you there? Do you see, feel, or hear? Are you more than we imagined? Not a singular you, but a plural you. The you in which we live and move and have our being. The you which lives and moves in, with, through, and beyond us. Then surely you can see, feel, hear, even in this darkness. Come quickly now, come to us, abide with us, see, hear, feel, and love through us. O divinity beyond and yet within our darkness, light our way. Here and now, now and always. Amen.
Where can I go from your spirit? Or where from your presence can I flee? If I ascend to the heavens, there you are. If I recline in Sheol, see, it is you. If I take up dawn's wings, if I settle at the farthest reaches of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, and night will become light behind me, even darkness is not dark to you. Night is as daylight, for dark is the same as light. For it was you who crafted my inward parts. You wove me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am awesomely and marvelously made. Wondrous are your works. That my soul knows very well. Within the womb of mystery we wait. Gestating in darkness, we fear the ending we cannot see. Surrounded by unknown dangers, we wait. Gestating in darkness, we dread the anticipated demise of treasured ways of being. Longing for the light, we imagine demons lurking in the dim recesses of life's challenges. Gestating in darkness, we cling to feeble notions of salvation. Grasping at old and tired prophecies, we are quick to abandon wisdom. Gestating in darkness, we forget the source of our fragile being. Gulping breaths too shallow to heal us, we settle for the trivial, calming numbness of mundane pleasures.
Good morning. How are we all doing?
Beautiful.
So my hope in putting this together is that we would have an opportunity to chat a little bit about the darkness in which we find ourselves in our own contexts. This past week has been a difficult one for lots of people, and we've had alarming news about new variants. We've grieved the loss of immigrants fleeing, even as we've heard about, at least in our context, we began with annunciations with the fleeing woman Hagar. And so I thought perhaps it would be a good time for us to just talk about how we navigate not just the darkness that seems to be descending in the world, but the darkness that descends in our own contexts. Anyone want to begin?
I was struck by the darkness and the gestation terminology, and I've mentioned Valerie Kerr before, a Sikh person, and she always makes this analogy between the womb and the tomb. They're both top, and most of you are probably familiar with this, but they're both dark places, and um, and how we interpret this dark time. Is it a rebirth, or is it a death? Or if we look at Jesus, the womb is the tomb, and there's no duality here. So I think that's important, and from my evolutionary viewpoint, things usually have to get worse before they get better, because there's no impetus to move forward if there's no jolt there. So, it's the glass half full, the glass empty, and I think we need to look at half full.
I remember when one of my goddaughters was very little, she was afraid of the dark, and I wish I could find it. I've never been able to find it again. I remember reading her a little book that talked about darkness as a blanket, as a lovely, comforting blanket that envelops us and protects us and allows us to rest. And I think so much of the imagery that we put together about darkness sets it as a frightening place. And I think for me, darkness is it can be frightening, but it can also be comforting and soothing and restful. And I also believe that it's in the darkness that we often encounter revelations of truth and the ability to experience that which is so much more than just ourselves, the divinity itself. And so I think that for me, when people ask me why Advent is my favorite season, it's because of the darkness. Anyone else?
I go out in the morning and it's dark. And this morning, this little sliver of the moon, I think you call it the crescent moon, was there. And it just brightened up so much of the pathway. I just thought, yeah. And as I walk, I see the beginning of light coming in. And this week we lit that first candle of hope. And when we were out in the encampment, so many other groups came, and our unhoused people, they're in that darkness of no houses. They're sleeping in the worst of conditions. And yet there was that hope. They came and they were grateful, and we just hug them and appreciate them. And, I always love the darkness of Advent, but I love lighting the candles because each week it's something different. This week it's hope. And that's what I hold on to, is that hope, that we will have better conditions. We have a booster now. I mean, that gives me great hope. Will it help us against the variant? I don't know. I just put it in God's hands. And as Hildegard said, all will be well.
Yeah. Juanita, would you mind, and Shante, I did see your hand, so you're on the list next. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about the encampment that you referred to?
It's near the airport, San Jose Airport, and there's about 200 homeless out there. The FAA, which is the airport, does not want anybody there. And so they've closed off, we have 40 acres, they've closed off about 20 acres, putting barriers. They even closed the public street, so you can't have access to that area. So that meant all those people that were there have moved into the other section. So you have crowding. You have one tent after another. The streets are lined with RVs. And so we go out every week and we set up tables. The nice thing is they did bring the city brought out porta potties, so which was right where we served food. So we have to serve food behind the porta potties. But people know us. We bring food down into those that are under the overpass. It's a wonderful ministry because you get to know the people, you hear their stories, especially the women. They have tried, some of them, for a year to get housing, and they get denied. And so, we just do whatever we can each week to bring them. The other thing we're working on is Casa de Clara. It's the Catholic worker house. And because we had squatters in there, we had to get a lawyer to evict them. And that took months, and they trashed the house. So now we're in the process of fixing that house back up and looking for Catholic workers who will come into the house and go out into the downtown area of San Jose and feed the homeless there. They've kicked all the people out of St. James Park. You can't sleep there overnight because all the high rises are coming in. The homeless are invisible to people, and they just don't want them in their neighborhood. So we fight that whole stigma every day. So yeah, you just don't give up. I just say, God's calling me to now get this house fixed up with others, and I'm not alone. But it's like a ministry that I never dreamed I'd be involved in. So yesterday was the feast of Dorothy Day. So I just have reread her story, and I just go, she never gave up. So we have to keep going forward.
Thank you for sharing that. More importantly, thank you for seeing the homeless and touching their needs.
I mean, yes, there's drugs out there. Yes, there's mental illness. I have a son with mental illness. It's just, they're people. God loves them, and we have to embrace them.
Mm-hmm. And for me, the important thing is that the way that love of God happens is through your hands and the hands of those you're working with. And so
pray we get the workers and we can get the house fixed up to bring the workers into it.
Thank you. So I saw Shantae's hand, then Renee, and then Sharon. Shante?
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful time listening to all of you. And Dawn, the story of Hagar hit me on Sunday, and it's been for a couple of years. I said I came out of this dark. I didn't know about Hagar. When I read, it was a darkness that opened up to show a woman of God. I was just awestruck. And you had that sermon this time. So sometimes we have to have our eyes opened to see the light. And this has been a week of hope. I think in some ways, I went with great hope to get my vaccine booster. And I was so excited. I went and I told everybody, I'll see you tomorrow. And the day after I got my shot, I didn't get up. I was in my bed. But I didn't, and I kept the room dark. There was no TV. I couldn't hear anything. I was feeling very unwell. And, but I felt good. I felt like I did something right. There's the hope. And I wanted more people, and people who are going to get the vaccines. I thought that was a good sign that people are going to do something about it. And then the other one today, you're talking about Advent in darkness and the gestation period. I'm reading the book called The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. And in the Great Depression, people went through what we are going through now. They came out, and there's a birthing scene where the baby dies and they bury the baby anonymous to everybody else. I thought, with the value of life. So, and there are parallels from the Depression and now what we are going through. So anyway, thank you. There have so many thoughts keep coming into my head. And I'm terribly excited about all these different things. Want to talk about it with somebody.
All right.
So
Well,
it's
we're
great.
glad
Thank you.
you're sharing it with us. Thank you, Shantae. Renee, I think your hand was next.
Yes, I resonated with Juanita's story about the homeless. We run a food cupboard in our little town of Weaverville. It's been going on for like 40 years out of our church, our little funky church, UCC church. And last Wednesday, or I forget, we were handing out turkeys to the homeless, which there's about 80 in our little town of 3,000, and also a bag of all the trimmings. And the story that just brightened my heart out of this was one of the women who is an advocate. She's a homeless person, but she advocates for the homeless, and she brings her camp stuff. And we have our cupboard is every Wednesday. So she came to get her trimmings and her turkeys. And usually for the homeless, we have ground turkey because it's very difficult for them to cook a whole turkey. And so I asked her, I said, which would you like? And she says, oh, the turkey. We want the turkey. What we do is we all get together and we dig a big hole and we put coals in there. We put that turkey in that hole and then we put coals on top of that. And we cook our turkey in the ground and we have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And, you know, it just astounded me of the immense imagination that people have in this harsh environment. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you. Yeah, the whole notion of our privilege and our sometimes people used to say first world problems, but they really are problems of privilege that we tend to fixate on are really they pale in comparison, and the opportunities for us to help are huge, to bring light into some of these situations. Sharon, I think you were next.
I just had a question for Juanita. I have a niece living in San Jose, and I know she would be interested in contributing. Is there a place she can contribute to this, to your cause?
Columbus Park, just have her call me. I'll put it in the chat if that's okay with
Yeah.
Dawn.
Yeah. I'll keep the chat private, so don't worry about that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? How are you coping with the endless onslaught of grim news? How are you coping with that?
Let's take the variant and when these things happen, we should be looking at analyzing them and not going back to try to go back to normal, but go forward. And this how much have we learned from COVID? I'm afraid not a lot. The interrelationship of everyone, and so if somebody gets COVID in Africa, it's going to affect all of us. Well, so what is our response? Closing borders, getting ourselves vaccinated, more inward looking again, so much inward looking. And so if this continues, how long will it take before we realize we're all interconnected? And and that's the blessing that this could bring if we stop and analyze this part.
Filling boats, planes with vaccines and taking them to Africa seems like a good idea at this moment. I was heartened to hear that your president is actually advocating for that, and It's hopefully we can advocate with our various authorities. I know some of us actually thanked our government for increasing the number of vaccines that we're sending, but now we need to say, okay, we need to send more. We need to send more. We need to do more. But I agree. We tend to say, and it's kind of a human instinct to say, how is this going to impact me personally? And I was heartened by how quickly we moved from shutting the borders to sharing vaccines. And that happened faster than I expected. So I see that as a ray of hope. And so lending our voices to the pleas for sending more vaccines, I think is important, very important. One of the opportunities when we're in these dark places, and I say opportunities because it really does expand who we are as humans. One of the opportunities in this darkness is to listen to the needs of others and be. We're because of our privilege, we have an ability to choose where we're going to lend our aid. And sometimes that alone is a daunting and almost, in some cases, paralyzing experience. How do you move beyond the massive need in the world to do something? Anyone had any experience with that?
When I was in Calcutta, India, and sometimes when we went through the slum areas and you saw the people on the street, the babies on a piece of cardboard lying on the floor, people waiting for food, I would think, I would cry. I would say, how can this change? There was no hope. You just didn't know how you're going to change all this. And it's you go into a very dark place. I wasn't there, but I was watching as I was going to school and seeing how terrible this. Once I watched a baby on a piece of cardboard lying there and wondered who is going to come pick up the baby. So we go through a very dark period. I was just thinking that right now in New Jersey, we are talking about helping food pantries and giving them food. And we've collected money from seniors and stuff. And that's our primary thing, is send money out to the food pantries. One of our churches has a goal of raising 40,000 by Christmas for the food pantries. I hope I see a light. I hope it helps. And I'm feeling kind of, I was feeling this week like we thought we were getting better and we'd come out of the coronavirus and everything. And suddenly there's this new virus and we don't know till for another couple of weeks how we're going to deal with it. I think that's the advent of that I'm waiting for. I'm hoping all the things we can do, we can be safe in our houses, but those who are not, how are we going to help them? How are we going to reach out? It's not just thinking about ourselves. And I think we have caught up in this elitist society, just thinking about ourselves and what it's all about me. But we need to step out of that and get in and change what's going on around us, see the needs of the people. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I think that during the season of Advent, we tell these sacred stories about, refugees, about homeless people, and we laud them in our stories and in our song and in our worship. And I think that the reality is many of us know that we're in a minority in terms of telling these sacred stories, which bring light and suggest hope. And I hope that we can make the transition from bemoaning the fact that our sacred stories aren't being told in ways that highlight the reality of refugees fleeing, or homeless people, or the poor, or the oppression of empire, and not worry so much about the reality that our sacred stories aren't being told in the public square, and begin to tell some of the sacred stories that we've just heard, the sacred stories of people bringing light into the darkness. There's a lot to counter here. We hear in the news over and over again, COVID, refugees, poverty, homeless people, violence breaking out in various different ways. And it can be demoralizing. It can rob us of our hope and make it more difficult for us to see these beautiful pieces of light. And so I can't imagine the amount of courage it must have taken for people in the first century to tell these stories, and to dip back into their own tradition, and take their tradition of Hagar, for example, and tell a new story about the birth of Jesus, the birth of love in their own time. How do we do that in our time? How do we dip back into our tradition, the richness of our tradition and the richness of Islam? I couldn't put the Annunciation stories that are in the Quran in one service, but there's a whole service there. The beautiful ways in which the Annunciation of Mary are told in the Quran. How do we dip into the sacred stories of ancestors from all over the world, indigenous peoples, and tell our stories in this day and in this time, using the light that they have shed, and helping to in a way magnify the light, become Mary and magnify the Magnificat, tell our own Magnificats. And so I think this kind of rehearsing the telling of these stories of hope is a way to begin. And I hope, my fondest desire is that we will be able to support one another in that storytelling. What do you, Steve?
Yeah, you started off with what we can do, and there's a amount of despair that you can be subjected to because there's so many problems with it. And I've tried to work through this, and one of the impetuses for this was when I read Charles Eisenstein's book, Climate, A New Story. And he basically starts with, I didn't start, but he ends with this kind of dream. He's a white rhino's confronting him and said, where were you when I was going extinct? And Eisenstein does a lot of good work and whatever. He just said, I'm sorry, I was busy doing, other things. And so, and it bothered him. But, and that got me to thinking that there really is a intersectionality, that anytime you do justice anywhere, it has a ripple effect. And justice is really the name of the game. I think that's what our religion calls us to do. And another book, Byron Stevenson, in Just Mercy, he basically, when he was asked, what's the opposite of poverty? And he said, justice. It's not wealth, it's justice. And so, and if you equate all our problems to justice, there's economic injustice, there's environmental injustice, there's gender injustice, all these things you could consider as injustices. And so anytime you fight injustice, and there's, if I fight injustice, let me give you an example of what I'm doing right now. Right now, my big focus is on, we've got this environmental injustice with the oil and whatever. And so we've got a big situation here where we're developing offshore wind. And that's fine. And so that tackles environmental justice, but it can have ripple effects. It can have economic injustice ripple effects. So what I've been looking at now is make sure this industry happens, and the opportunities are shared with those less fortunate who actually have suffered more in the ecological devastation than the rest of us. So there's this interrelationship between these injustices. And if we realize we attack injustice where we can, where we feel comfortable, where we've got our expertise or our influence, knowing that they're all connected. That's how I get by.
Thank you for that. And I think one of the things in terms of telling our sacred stories and this piece about justice is recognizing that this quest for justice also involves sacrifice, especially amongst those of us who are privileged. And so, you know, I'm Lutheran, so the theology of the cross is going to slip in there, right? How do we tell our stories in ways in a culture that trains us to be self-centered? How do we tell our stories in ways that can be heard so that people recognize that justice isn't the dopamine you get from liking something on Facebook because it's talking about justice. Justice is about sacrifice. I mean, most of you have heard me quote Cornel West, you know, justice is what love looks like in public. And so when I talk about love, not the hearts and flowers kind of love, I'm talking about the love that does require sacrifice. And so telling our stories in ways that say that this is part of our humanity, you know, in order to allow ourselves to be touched by the pain of others, we can do a few things once we experience the pain of others, and that is block it or touch it. And touching it involves sacrifice. And so the work of justice is costly, and love can be very, very costly. And part of the pain, I know around the drowning of refugees, which included so many children, part of the pain of that is our love for the people in our lives and imagining what would happen if they were on those boats. It's a little easier for me these days because of the floods in British Columbia to imagine my friends and family in the line of losing their homes, you know. And so how when it touches our sort of personal sphere, it's the love that we have for those who are close to us that triggers that compassion in us. And so how do we allow ourselves to be triggered by people beyond our sphere? And that's a painful piece. I mean, you know, the darkness for me is often a time to sort of rest secure, knowing that I need to rest so that I can wake up and see, you know, where the light is. Where do I go here and there? So allowing ourselves that kind of balance. Mary Ellen, Juanita, and then Shante.
Thank you. In thinking about Advent and the time of darkness, I think as I've gotten older and went through so many dark times, I realized there's always light in the darkness. There's never a period where it's just dark. So part of that understanding comes from my sense of myself as a light and carrying the light, and then going out wherever there is a need or responding to what the need may be. I am bringing that light. Like Juanita, you're bringing the light with you when you're going and serving food to the homeless and seeing them and recognizing them. So I feel like we're all carrying the light with us. And in some way, as dark as it can be, I think even Brian Stevenson will talk about, you know, there's no time not to hope. Like that just can't be allowed. So if I do get overwhelmed at times, then I feel like I can give that a few minutes and then move on. Because everyone who's alive today, I think we're here for a very specific reason, and to really be showing up with the light and helping others be hopeful or inspire them or carry the holy language out there and telling the stories.
And Mary Ellen, there are also times when we get to put down our lampshade, or whatever you call it, our lantern, because I think one of the things that we don't do well especially in North American Christianity, is we don't do lament very well. And our culture and our society, we don't do lament publicly, and I think that we're really the one of the ancient skills of lamenting was to have professional lamenters, and part of that was to know how far to take it, so that there was always someone there who could have some light and make sure that you just didn't descend into madness. But there isn't a need as an individual to allow ourselves the time to lament. And sometimes it's the protection of the darkness. I mean, I can't count the number of times that, you know, especially growing up, where you're in the dark and you can just let your tears flow. There's that embrace of darkness that allows you the freedom to feel, to rend our garments, as they say in Scripture, and just howl. Ululation is a lost art, and so who wouldn't howl at seeing what Shante has seen in Calcutta? Who wouldn't howl at seeing those overloaded boats go down? And sometimes moving to hope or light can almost be a disrespect of the, you know, it, you know, I know you didn't mean that, but
I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
I get the spiritual bypass of that. Yeah. I know, I want to feel the grief, because that's important. I mean, there has to be grief. I feel like if we don't have our hearts broken, there's something wrong with us.
Yeah. And I think the real value of communities, especially community like this, is that there's always someone in the community who can say, it's all shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. You know, love is at the source of this. Andrew does this for me all the time, sometimes when I get really depressed, and he's able to give that steadiness. Carol does it for me as well. Hearing your sacred stories here, it does it for me. But there are days when I don't want to hear that. I just want to howl. And the darkness is a beautiful sanctuary for that. And knowing that even in the darkness, that darkness itself is within divinity. That's crucial for me. I've forgotten who's next.
Juanita.
Juanita, thank you.
You know, the news can be very dark, just listening to all the violence and what's happening. And yet our unsung heroes are those doctors and nurses that are working with COVID patients. I've got 2 daughters that are working with COVID patients every day. And just to put on the gear that they have to wear all day long. You know, I get frustrated with the mask when the glasses fog up.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing this all day, and how hard it is for them. My one daughter says, you know, so many have quit because they're exhausted. They're working 12-hour shifts. 5 days a week. And it's just exhausting. And so I just think we need to listen to their stories.
Yes.
And hear more about how we need to support them, that they're doing such a beautiful job of helping these very sick people. And that to me is putting the light into their lives.
And also, I mean, the children
Oh yeah.
who are sitting in classrooms all day long with masks on. My 7-year-old granddaughter came into the office on the weekend right here, and she said, "What are you writing about, Gran?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of trying to write a prayer about COVID." And she said, "Oh, COVID. Let me tell you about COVID." And so she told me about wet masks playing in the playground. And she ended up her little story by saying, "But we have to do it so that none of our friends catch COVID." So there's this kind of innate goodness that's just there. And so telling these stories and supporting one another with the hope is crucial. Yeah. Did I miss somebody here in this?
I think so.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen then, and we'll come back after this next piece. Let me just do this in the right order.
Within the womb of mystery, the darkness embraces, nourishes, challenges, refusing to sever the cord which sustains us, until we are ready to see the ending we could not see beyond our fear. Gestating in mystery, we wait for the ending which gives birth to hope. In our waiting, the darkness tenderly enfolds us until the breaking of the waters of life. Within this womb of mystery, we wait. Amen.
Let us continue in prayer. Peering into the darkness of the world's misery, we seek wisdom of the Holy One, so that we can nurture the love the world hungers for. Let us prepare for the birth of the love gestating in, with, through, and all around us. As we wait, let us not settle for meager mangers to receive love, but open our hearts and minds so that in us love will find a home in which to grow and to thrive. Let the Spirit who dwells among us stir us, move us, and open us to the cries of our neighbors. Let the power of Christ move us beyond sentiment to action. Let the love which is divine work through us to create justice, so that peace on earth becomes more than a holiday greeting. Let us give birth to love soon, so that all may know joy. We pray, trusting the one who is our Creator, Christ, and Spirit, to do great things in, with, through, and beyond us, now and always. Amen.
As you explore the contours of darkness in which love is gestating, do not be afraid. The mystery holds us. The mystery works in us so that we can give birth to love. May you feel the mystery all around you, in darkness and in light. May you know the power of our lover, beloved, and love itself, doing great things in you now and always. The peace of love is with you all.
And also with you.
Thank you all for sharing your light this morning. It is much appreciated. Join us next Tuesday, December the 7th, for our Advent Sanctuary, at which time we will be exploring the theme of Voices in the Wilderness. Join us at 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning over Zoom. The link is on our website, holycrosslutheran.ca. If you are unable to join us over Zoom, we will be posting a recording on our website. That's holycrosslutheran.ca. Thank you for joining us. Shalom, dear ones. Shalom.